The landlord made a public statement that he had nothing against the artist or the art form, but he didn't want that gentleman running it. Anyone wanting to step up to the plate, feel free to contact him, and he would let it continue. At that point, I reached out to him. We had a quick meeting in the loading dock, a handshake.
Is this Gerald Wolkoff?
Gerald, yep. And the landlord said, okay, go ahead. I just don't want any religious, pornography, or political content. Fair enough. I got keys to a little closet, aka my office. I had no idea what I was going to do with the building. I had no idea what 5 Points would become. All I knew is that I wanted to come up with a name that didn't put the graffiti label on the property, and didn't give someone an idea. They categorize us and stuff. So I said, 5 boroughs coming to 1 point, 5 points. Sounds good. That spread not only through the 5 boroughs, through the entire world. And then artists were planning vacations around coming to 5 Points to save their money to come to 5 Points to leave work on what was a museum.
So these were artists who were calling you, presumably from abroad, from other countries, saying, "I'm coming to New York. Can I get in and do some work?"
And some cases, hardly any English.
No English, yeah.
And
that's amazing.
Paint. And I'm like, oh, okay, you want to paint? Okay.
And they would know to bring a sketch.
They bring a sketch.
Very often, and it was through referral. So they would be like, I'm referred by so-and-so from the UK. And Mears is horrible with name, but he's great visually. So they would be like, look, that my friend did this. I'm in the same crew. So right there you have an introduction. From 2002 to 2005, there was a rapid growth in the quality of the art, in the knowledge of the existence of the building, of Mears as a curator, of 5 Points being the place you wanted to paint at if you wanted to make a statement. And then in 2009, there was an accident. One of the staircase collapsed. And New Yorkers, for example, very easily takes it for granted till it's gone. And so it was kind of a wake-up call where the staircase collapsed, and we didn't know whether the 5 Points program was going to go on. And nobody was concerned about it because an artist almost lost her life. So everybody was talking about the fact that she was in ICU, what was going to happen. The tenant artists from the inside of the building were asked to leave, vacate the building, because it was not up to code. And then Gerald Wolkoff called Mears by the beginning of the summer and said, start again. You guys start again. So it started with kind of a new energy in some ways, like everyone felt blessed. And at that point, I mean, I remember that summer, and I think Mears slept at 5 Points for 2 months. You still have pictures of him falling asleep in the loading dock next to a ladder, because he was getting artists from all over to come. They had lift. So there were, and Christian Cortez and his pieces, which are in the case, did one of his pieces at night, 3 nights in a row, because he was working on weekdays. So on the lift with Mears driving the list, other volunteers, and I think that really it was a second life. Like the 5 Points took a whole new direction, and really starting that moment, the crowds grew rapidly. The amount of schools reaching out, asking to do tours and walk through universities, and then tourism was insane. Everything was done organically. And for tours, to answer your question, basically we had an email set up, and Mears is not a big fan of emails, but I started really getting involved in 2009. And I was answering and scheduling all of it, sending them Excel spreadsheet with the amount of tours and schools, which he never looked at. So I would just text and remind him and other artists that we had people coming.
Ultimately, everyone does things for fame, for the exposure, and people were embracing It was education to the public. It was kind of bridging the gap between the two worlds.
I mean, I think it's really important to remember that institutions like PS1 started in a very similar manner, and that although it seems organized, and it was, artists, and I interviewed many artists before, not all of them, before we went to court, many of them, it became a career maker. They felt that it was not only an opportunity to elevate their craft because they had the opportunity to have a large space or leisure time to execute something in a legal manner, but it also became very much a portfolio builder, which they used in order to help their commercial business, which, is like kind of like a Peter and Pan situation where they're, raising money doing commercial work in order to feed their love of street and graffiti art.
Which gives them more commercial work.
Exactly. And so it was actually very elemental to a lot of artists in the case in particular that, the fact that Jonathan chose their work from a phone or from other pieces that he had seen or from their reputation
Emails
was just like someone, a young emerging artist being chosen by, a top curator at MoMA. It had that gravitas and prestige that the kind of more institutional art world associates with certain names.
I mean, like I said, it evolved. I didn't go into it having any idea that it would become nearly as large as it did, and affect me on an emotional level, like a human being would. But it did,
But a lot of artists, when I interviewed them, they were very cognizant of what wall they were getting, how high profile it was, and like any mural, they were very focused on site specificity, and that was also about building prestige in their portfolio. It's like if they got a great wall, then they would do a better work and spend more time on it and more paint and more money and make it a higher kind of quality than a smaller area. And that's the basic elements to curatorial practice. I mean, those are the same fundamentals that we use in a museum or in an art fair or in a gallery.
And Jonathan was very good at pitching and pushing artists. And there was a mural by two French artists, Calig and Jalouse, who are really known and really good. They're not part of the case. And they really showed up and they wanted to do a quick piece to say, I painted at 5 points. And Mears looked at their portfolio and spoke to them, and they were supposed to spend their last day in New York, do a quick piece, do their shopping, next day they were flying out. He managed to convince them, gave them a good spot, and they did this magnificent piece. And when it became really beyond repairs, that's when it went, and it was replaced by Mr. Blob. But they pushed themselves so much, and it was a mix of New York and Paris landscape with their iconic characters, and it became a favorite and was beautiful, and they're still today thank Mears for pushing them, because that wall became so recognizable and they got so much work in Paris because of that wall on 5 points.
I mean, Lady Pink testified that,
Yeah.
and it's really incredible to read her testimony because she talked about how that spot faces PS1, and it was kind of like a face-off between the graffiti vernacular art world that she rose up in, that has now become institutionalized, and the institutionalized fine art world. And she knew it, and she was playing with that, and it's
That's
really
great.
quite amazing.
Very rare for Mears not to be there except traveling, but even I was put in charge, it was horrible, of one weekend for Mother's Day. And my job was just to keep things good for Saturday and Sunday. And it was very specific. I had a list of walls I could give out. I had a list of the artists who were coming. And because it was Mother's Day, Mears had said to me, New York artists don't need to paint today. They're fine. It's Mother's Day. I'm taking the day with my mom. So any New York artist, you say no. I don't want to hear it. But European artists had their spot pre-assigned, so I would welcome them, give them the wall, which was pre-established by Mears on a Saturday. And of course I have the New York artist showing up.
I mean,
Come on, Marie, give me one. And it was a no-no. And I had to call him, and once he got on the phone and he said, come back next weekend, dude. I don't have a spot for you. And everybody respected that rule.
Wow.
Nobody would dare to even take a can and touch a wall without his blessing.
The number one golden rule is you have to completely cover what you're going over. You cannot utilize someone else's mural as part of yours. It's a sign of disrespect, and you have to cover it completely. And that always was the golden rule. You know, it's respect.
But ragging, rolling over.
In graffiti term, if you're walking down the street and there's an artist you do not like, you go over him as marking your territory. That's considered ragging. Actually, the whitewash was the biggest rag that ever occurred at 5 Points and probably in graffiti history, because it was disrespectful, because it was partial, because you could still kind of guess what was behind. But in the legal concept, Mears was very strict in assigning a wall and saying, okay, this is the wall you're getting, you have to roll it perfectly. I don't want to see even a signature, or, oh, you like the sky because the other artist did a beautiful sky or background. Well, tough S. You're not using that sky, you have to do your own work.
So I basically, did a lot of reading and then tried to come up with a methodology that used connoisseurship as a basis, but also looked at different kinds of values, like what kinds of values do we associate with art, and developed a kind of consistent process with looking at the artist's career, the artist's style, the materials.
For each aerosol artist.
For each aerosol artist, for
plaintiff.
each artwork. And then I interviewed some of them. I created dossiers of each one of them. So, what were their career highlights? What were their other works that were recognized? Who recognized them? Jonathan's role as a curator, and how that in and of itself lent significance and stature to the individual artworks.
And the judge seemed to be very taken by that
Yes.
approach.
Yes.
And that was, just to explain it a little more, the idea that because Mears was such a well-known and respected artist, that if he selected someone for 5 Points, it meant that they were important.
Well, actually, no. Mears became a well-known artist and a well-known curator because of 5 Points. I mean, he has both. He ended up having kind of both of those reputations.
Right.
So his artwork being his artwork, but as a curator looking at all of these artists, most artists don't care about other artists, quite frankly. They're very into their own craft and everything, and they're looking at it for reference, but they're not actually looking at it to be a connoisseur. And Jonathan, in that process of looking at all these artists and their portfolios and overseeing all this, in and of itself, he became respected as a connoisseur and as an expert in aerosol art. I knew that, there were things we do every day when we work with emerging artists. When you look at an artwork, how do you figure out whether it's good, better, or best? So is it a work of merit? And the word merit for me was very important, because merit is, in the art world, that's not an illustrious comment. You would never say,
It
someone's
sounds like damning with faint praise.
It doesn't have gravitas, right? So it's, to me, that word alone was very operative. It's a work of merit. That means it has to be of some professional quality or craftsmanship, but it's not a high bar, right?
Sure.
It's a lower bar.
It doesn't have to be a masterpiece.
It doesn't. It definitely doesn't have to be a masterpiece. The first was merit, talking about what merit meant to me, what merit means in the art world to most people, and then the second tier was it recognized by three communities? One, an art expert, i.e. me. Two, other art professionals, which also theoretically I applied Jonathan, but any other art professionals that might have written about him, or blogs or critics or curators. And then the third was a cross-section of society, and that's the one that was kind of like the hardest to interpret, but I used a variety of different things there, and that's where a lot of commentary, and I think it's interesting, the thing that keeps on being brought out is the use of social media. So that was a creative thing that I didn't know, because where is the bar? It's always about like what is the breaking point of when it goes from unrecognized to recognized. But I evaluated every artwork according to all three, and almost every single artist in my mind met all three standards, but the law only requires one. You only need to be recognized by one of the three communities. So that's what I did.
It's obviously really different explaining these issues of stature and recognition and what it means to be part of the canon or to be an important part of art history to someone who's in the art world versus someone who's not in the art world and just does not care, does not understand the import. Did you struggle with that? How to?
I really didn't. You know, I think that was the biggest difference between me and the defense's art expert. You know, when you're looking at art, emerging art, meaning there's no context, nobody's written about it, it's coming out of an artist studio, or you curate a show, which I've done many shows, you're resting on your eyes, your vision, your ears, your interpretation. You don't have anything else to lean on. So you develop a viewpoint. I mean, that's what galleries do every day, right? They're creating culture. So I, you know, basically in the first, you know, the art expert, I voiced my own interpretation and writing of them and did what's called a visual analysis, which is the most basic art historical exercise you enter in when you're studying art history. The difference between me versus an archaeologist or a Renaissance art history is I have no history. I have to use all the information, all the visual elements, and all the aesthetics and my knowledge of style and put something together that's a discussion or a logical argument for why this, I think, is valuable. They have their own language. I mean,
Right.
what's the difference between a rag and, you know, like, what are all these words? I mean, it's such a steep learning curve.
such a gangster.
I am a civilian. And so is Taylor.
So am I.
So we're
So
very
are
proud
you.
of our inside
there's a learning
outside
curve.
stuff.
She's
There's a
a
big
honorary
learning curve.
writer.
So one of the ways we try to get around that is to tell my story and demonstrate it. Like, I mean, how can you talk about line or color or modeling without being able to point to it, right? A couple of times I pushed it by using way too many academic terms. I think my tombstone was Gesamtkunstwerk, and oh my god, there was like so many. The defense was like.
Sounds like the judge was appreciative of it.
Yes, I mean, he wanted to move very quickly, and I appreciated that. But it was a
Judges
lot.
always do.
It was a lot of material to go through 49 artworks